Sometimes the greatest gifts come in the smallest packages. When 8-year-old Lila brings home a floppy-eared puppy from the school fair, her grandfather Ray thinks it's just another moment of joy in a life already touched by sadness. Ray, a retired veterinarian and recent widower, knows animals, but this puppy is different. Something unusual about the tag around its neck reads, "For real, check my heart." When Ray runs a scan with his equipment, he discovers something that changes everything. A microchip linked to a classified military program designed to detect illness. The puppy wasn't just a prize, it was a biosensor that identified something serious. But what could a discarded government experiment know about a little girl's health that her family doesn't? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something for you. Shut. Ray Thompson stood at his kitchen window, watching the October leaves drift across his backyard like memories settling into place. At 67, he had learned that autumn held a particular weight, not just in the changing seasons, but in the way life reminded you that everything beautiful eventually lets go. The veterinary diploma hanging in his home office had collected 4 decades of dust and stories. Each scratch and water stain a testament to countless animals he had healed, comforted, or gently helped across the final threshold. The house felt different now, 6 months after Martha's passing. 42 years of marriage had filled every corner with her presence. The way she hummed while making coffee, how she always left a book spine up on the kitchen counter, her habit of talking to his patients as if they were old friends. The silence wasn't empty exactly, but it carried an expectation that would never be fulfilled again. His reflection was broken by the sound of gravel crunching in the driveway. Through the window, he watched his daughter Sarah's aging Honda pull up beside his truck. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to carry more weight than should rest on any single pair of shoulders. At 34, she had inherited her mother's gentle strength and her father's stubborn determination, qualities that had kept their small family together through losses that might have shattered others. Lila tumbled out of the passenger seat like concentrated sunshine, her backpack bouncing against her legs as she raced toward the house. Her 8-year-old energy seemed to bend the very air around her, creating pockets of brightness that reminded Ray why he had chosen to keep living after Martha died. 2 years had passed since the accident that took Lila's parents, his son Michael and daughter-in-law Karen, but grief in children wore different clothes than it did in adults. Where Ray and Sarah carried their sorrow like old coats that never quite fit right, Lila wore hers in sudden storms that passed as quickly as they came, leaving behind clear skies and renewed wonder. "Grandpa Ray," she called, her voice carrying the particular excitement that meant something extraordinary had happened at school. "Look what I won." Ray opened the front door, stepping onto the porch that Martha had insisted they paint blue every 3 years. "What a smile could power the whole county," he said, crouching down to meet Lila at eye level. It was something Martha used to say, and keeping her words alive felt like tending a garden she would never see bloom again. Sarah approached more slowly, her nurse's uniform wrinkled from a double shift at Millbrook General. The dark circles under her eyes spoke of nights spent balancing grief, responsibility, and the relentless demands of keeping others healthy, while her own heart was still mending. Ray felt the familiar pang of wanting to fix what couldn't be fixed, to heal what required time rather than medicine. "She's been bouncing in her seat for 20 minutes, Sarah said, managing a tired smile. "Wouldn't tell me what she won until we got here." Lila reached into her backpack with the ceremony of someone unveiling a masterpiece. What emerged was a small golden retriever puppy, perhaps 8 weeks old, with oversized paws and ears that seemed designed for a much larger dog. The puppy regarded Ray with intelligent brown eyes that held an unusual alertness, as if it were studying him rather than simply seeing him. "The school fair had a raffle," Lila explained, holding the puppy against her chest with the careful reverence children reserve for truly precious things. "Mrs. Henderson said I won the grand prize. Isn't he the most beautiful thing you've ever seen? Ray's veterinarian instincts kicked in automatically. The puppy appeared healthy. Bright eyes, clean nose, responsive to touch. But something in its demeanor struck him as unusual. Most puppies this age were either sleepy or hyperactive, interested primarily in food, comfort, and play. This one seemed almost contemplative, its gaze moving between Ray and Lila with a purposefulness that suggested training rather than natural puppy behavior. "He certainly is handsome," Ray said, gently examining the puppy's ears and mouth while Lila held him. "What's this around his neck?" A small tag hung from a basic collar, not the usual identification tag, but something that looked almost medical. Ray adjusted his reading glasses and leaned closer. Instead of a name and phone number, the tag bore an inscription that made no immediate sense. "For real, check my heart." "That's an interesting name tag," Sarah observed, moving closer to see what had caught her father's attention. "Mrs. Henderson said his name is already picked out," Lila said. "But she didn't tell me what it was." "She said we'd figure it out when we got home." Ray frowned slightly. The tag didn't feel like something that belonged on a raffle prize at a small-town school fair. The metal was high quality, the engraving precise in a way that suggested military or medical origin rather than a local pet store. More concerning was the puppy's reaction to being handled. Instead of the squirming and playful nipping typical of young dogs, it remained calm and alert, almost as if it were allowing the examination rather than enduring it. "Did Mrs. Henderson mention where the puppy came from?" Ray asked, still studying the unusual tag. "She said someone donated it special for the fair," Lila replied, scratching behind the puppy's ears. "He likes me, Grandpa. Look how he looks at me." The puppy had indeed fixed its attention on Lila with remarkable focus. Ray had seen thousands of animals in his career, and he recognized the difference between normal animal behavior and something more purposeful. This wasn't the typical bonding between child and pet. It was as if the puppy were performing some kind of assessment. "Can we keep him, please?" Lila's voice carried the hope of someone who had already decided the answer in her heart. "I promise I'll take care of him. I'll feed him and walk him and teach him tricks." Sarah looked at her father with the exhausted expression of someone who had learned to pick her battles carefully. Between working double shifts and caring for Lila, she barely had time to maintain their current responsibilities, let alone add a puppy to the mix. But Ray could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Lila had lost so much already, and this unexpected joy might be exactly what their small family needed. "Your grandfather would be the one to ask," Sarah said diplomatically. "I'm hardly home enough to house-train a puppy." Ray studied his granddaughter's face, seeing Martha's eyes and Michael's determined chin. The request wasn't really about the puppy. It was about holding on to something bright in a world that had taken too much already. His own heart, still tender from months of grieving, recognized the need for something to nurture and protect. "Well," he said slowly, aware that his next words would change their family dynamic, "this old house has been pretty quiet lately, and I suppose a young fellow like this might appreciate having an experienced veterinarian nearby." Lila's squeal of delight could have powered the county, just as Martha would have said. She threw her free arm around Ray's neck, the puppy pressed safely between them, and for a moment the weight of loss lifted enough to remember what pure joy felt like. "We'll need to set up a proper space for him," Ray continued, his practical nature taking over. "Food, water, a bed, toys. And we'll want to have him examined by another vet to make sure he's healthy. Can we do it in your office?" Lila asked, referring to the fully equipped veterinary clinic Ray had maintained in his converted garage. Though officially retired, he still treated neighbors' animals and provided emergency care when the nearest veterinary hospital was 40 minutes away. "I suppose we could start there," Ray agreed, though something about the mysterious tag continued to nag at him. 40 years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts when something didn't feel quite right. And this puppy, despite its apparent health and obvious appeal, carried an air of mystery that veterinary school hadn't prepared him for. As they walked toward the house, the puppy's attention remained fixed primarily on Lila, but Ray noticed it occasionally glancing at him as if seeking approval or permission. The behavior was subtle, but unmistakable to someone who had spent decades reading animal psychology. This wasn't a typical pet-owner relationship beginning to form. This felt more like a professional assignment being carried out. Inside the house, Lila immediately began making plans for her new companion, chattering about names and sleeping arrangements and training schedules. Sarah settled into Martha's old chair with a cup of coffee, watching her daughter with the careful attention of someone monitoring a healing patient. Ray found himself studying the puppy, which had positioned itself near Lila, but maintained that same alert watchfulness that seemed so unusual for such a young animal. The tag caught the light from the kitchen window, and Ray found himself reading it again. For real, check my heart. The more he considered it, the more it sounded less like a name and more like an instruction. But an instruction for what? And given by whom? As evening settled over Millbrook, Ray made a mental note to examine the puppy more thoroughly in his clinic the following day. His veterinary instincts, honed by decades of practice, were telling him that this unexpected gift might be more complex than it appeared. But watching Lila's face as she gently stroked the puppy's fur, seeing the first genuine lightness in her expression since the accident, Ray decided that some mysteries were worth solving carefully. In their own time, the puppy seemed to sense his scrutiny and met his gaze directly, those intelligent brown eyes holding steady in a way that seemed almost human in its awareness. For just a moment, Ray had the unsettling feeling that he was being evaluated as much as he was evaluating, that this small animal knew something important that the rest of them had yet to discover. Outside, the October wind scattered more leaves across the yard, each one letting go at exactly the right moment, trusting that something good waited on the other side of the fall. The next morning arrived with the crisp clarity that October mornings brought to small towns, when the air held promises of apple cider and wood smoke. Ray had slept poorly, his mind circling around the strange puppy and its even stranger tag. He found Lila in the kitchen, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside a makeshift bed they had assembled from old blankets. The puppy lay beside her, but even in sleep, it maintained that alert quality that had troubled Ray the evening before. "He didn't cry at all last night," Lila reported, looking up from the bowl of cereal she was sharing with her new companion. "Mom said puppies usually cry when they're away from their litter mates." Sarah appeared in the doorway, already dressed for another shift at the hospital. "She's been up since 5, making sure he was comfortable," she said, accepting the cup of coffee Ray offered. "I have to admit, he's remarkably well behaved for such a young dog." Ray nodded, studying the puppy over his coffee cup. In 40 years of veterinary practice, he had learned to recognize the subtle signs that separated ordinary animals from exceptional ones. Intelligence, unusual training, specific breeding, they all left markers that experienced eyes could detect. This puppy displayed all of them. "I was thinking we should give him a proper examination this morning," Ray said. "Get a baseline on his health, check for any issues the previous owner might not have mentioned." The school fair people. Sarah asked. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned a donor, but she was vague about the details," Ray replied. "It's probably nothing, but thoroughness never hurt anyone." After Sarah left for work, Ray and Lila made their way to his converted garage clinic. The space had been Martha's idea originally, a way for Ray to continue practicing after retirement without the overhead of maintaining a full veterinary office. The equipment was older but well maintained, and Ray had invested in several pieces of diagnostic technology that rivaled what the younger vets in the county were using. "Can I help?" Lila asked, settling into the chair Martha used to occupy during Ray's examinations. She held a notebook and pencil, ready to document whatever important veterinary discoveries they might make. "You can be my assistant," Ray agreed, lifting the puppy onto the examination table. "First, we'll check his basic health. Heart, lungs, reflexes, temperature." The puppy submitted to the examination with unusual patience. Most young dogs required restraint and reassurance during their first vet visit, but this one seemed almost familiar with the process. Ray noted excellent muscle tone, clear eyes, and perfect dental development. The heart rate was strong and regular, lungs clear. Reflexes normal. He's in exceptional condition, Ray observed, more to himself than to Lila. Almost like he's been receiving professional care. It was while examining the puppy's neck that Ray first noticed the small, hard spot beneath the skin, just below the collar line. His fingers found it immediately, a tiny lump that felt distinctly artificial. "Lila, would you hand me the microchip scanner?" Ray asked, keeping his voice casual while his pulse began to quicken. Most veterinarians used basic microchip scanners to read the identification numbers embedded in pets for recovery purposes. Ray's scanner, however, was military surplus equipment that Martha had helped him acquire years ago when he was consulting on a research project. It could read far more than simple ID numbers. The scanner beeped immediately when he passed it over the puppy's neck. Instead of the usual alphanumeric pet identification code, the display showed something that made Ray's blood run cold, a complex series of numbers and letters that he recognized as military-grade encryption protocols. "What does it say, Grandpa?" Lila asked, leaning forward to see the scanner's display. Ray stared at the readout, his mind racing through possibilities. The code was definitely military in origin, but not just any military classification. The prefix indicated a research program, and the secondary code suggested something related to biological monitoring or detection. "It's a special kind of identification," Ray said carefully, not wanting to alarm Lila while he processed what he was seeing. Much more detailed than normal pet chips. He ran the scanner again, this time activating the deep red function that could access metadata if it existed. What appeared on the screen made his hands shake slightly. Project designation Heart Guard. Classification level restricted. Training status active biosensor. Target parameters pediatric oncology detection. Ray set the scanner down and looked at the puppy, which was watching him with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. This wasn't a pet at all. It was a piece of military equipment designed to detect cancer in children, and it was currently focused on his granddaughter. "Grandpa, you look funny," Lila observed, with the directness that children brought to adult emotions. "I'm just surprised by how advanced his identification system is," Ray managed, his veterinary training helping him maintain professional composure while his grandfather's heart began to panic. "It's much more sophisticated than typical pet microchips." He needed to understand what he was dealing with, but he also needed to keep Lila from sensing his growing alarm. The puppy, whatever its real designation was, had been specifically trained to detect cancer markers in children. If it was showing the focused attention toward Lila that Ray had observed, there could be only one explanation. "Why don't you take him outside for a few minutes?" Ray suggested. "Let him get familiar with the yard while I clean up the equipment." Lila agreed readily, scooping up the puppy and heading for the door. Ray watched through the window as she began showing the animal around the property, pointing out important features like the best sticks for fetching and the spot where Martha used to grow tomatoes. The moment they were out of sight, Ray activated the scanner's connection protocol and uploaded the microchip data to his computer. What he found in the military databases, his research, credentials still allowed him to access, made his worst fears seem understated. Project Heartguard had been a classified program designed to train dogs as early cancer detection systems, specifically for use in pediatric oncology. The program had been terminated 18 months ago due to ethical concerns and funding issues. According to the records, all participating animals were supposed to have been either transferred to other military programs or humanely euthanized. Yet here was Heartguard 7, very much alive and apparently carrying out its training mission with his granddaughter. Ray scrolled through the technical specifications, his medical knowledge helping him understand the implications. These dogs were trained to detect specific chemical markers that appeared in the earliest stages of cancer development, often months before symptoms appeared or medical tests could identify the disease. Their accuracy rate was reportedly over 90%. The puppies had been selected and trained from birth, their natural scenting abilities enhanced through specialized conditioning that turned them into living diagnostic equipment. They were taught to display specific behaviors when they detected target markers, increased attention, protective positioning, subtle alertness that wouldn't alarm the subjects being monitored. Ray's hands trembled as he read the behavioral descriptions. Everything matched what he had observed in the puppy's interaction with Lila. The focused attention, the protective positioning, the unusual alertness. These weren't signs of normal bonding between pet and child. They were diagnostic indicators. Through the window, he watched Lila playing fetch with the puppy, her laughter carrying across the yard like music. The animal's behavior was even more pronounced now that Ray knew what to look for. It stayed close to Lila, positioning itself on her left side, where it would be most likely to detect respiratory and circulatory markers. When she bent down to pet it, the puppy's attention focused on her chest and neck area with unmistakable intensity. Ray closed his eyes and leaned against the examination table, feeling the weight of knowledge that no grandfather should have to carry. If the dog's training was accurate, Lila was in the early stages of cancer. If the dog was wrong, he was about to subject his granddaughter to unnecessary medical testing and emotional trauma based on the behavior of a supposedly decommissioned military experiment. But, as a veterinarian and as a grandfather, he knew he couldn't ignore what he had discovered. The question was how to proceed without destroying the fragile peace Lila had found with her new companion, and without creating panic in a family that had already endured too much loss. The puppy had somehow found its way from a terminated military program to a school fair prize, specifically, won by a child who might need its unique abilities. That couldn't be coincidence. Someone had arranged for this to happen, but why? And what were they monitoring? Ray looked at the scanner display one more time, memorizing the codes and classifications. Then he deleted the data from his computer and returned the equipment to its storage case. Whatever was happening, he needed to understand it completely before involving Sarah or medical authorities. Outside, Lila was teaching the puppy to sit, her patience and gentleness creating a scene of perfect innocence. Ray watched them through the window and made a decision that would change everything. He was going to find out exactly what Project Heartguard was, how this animal had ended up with his granddaughter, and what it meant for Lila's future. But first, he was going to call in every favor and contact he had accumulated in 40 years of veterinary practice. Because if this dog was right about what it was detecting, time was going to be the most important factor in everything that came next. The autumn sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard where a little girl played with a dog that might be trying to save her life. That evening, after Lila had fallen asleep with the puppy curled protectively beside her bed, Ray found himself in Martha's study for the first time since her death. The room still carried her scent, lavender and the particular mustiness of well-loved medical textbooks. Her oncology nursing journals lined the shelves in careful chronological order, each one representing years of dedicated service to cancer patients at the regional medical center. Martha had been meticulous in her record-keeping, not just of official cases, but of experimental treatments and emerging detection methods she had encountered during her 30-year career. Ray pulled down the journal from 2 years before her retirement, remembering conversations they had shared about revolutionary approaches to early cancer detection. The pages fell open to a section titled Biological Detection Methods, and Ray felt his breath catch. Martha had written extensive notes about experimental programs using trained animals for medical diagnosis. Dogs detecting seizures, cats identifying infections, even rabbits trained to respond to specific chemical markers in human breath. Project Heartguard mentioned in Dr. Vasquez's presentation, one entry read, military research into canine cancer detection. Remarkable accuracy rates, but ethical concerns about human subjects unaware of testing. Program appears promising but troubled by consent issues. Ray's hands shook as he read his late wife's careful observations. She had known about HeartGuard years ago, had even attended presentations about its development. Her notes included contact information for Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead researcher, along with Martha's own concerns about the program's methodology. Animals trained from birth to detect specific oncological markers. Another entry detailed success rate above 90% in controlled trials, but questions remain about psychological impact on subjects who test positive. Dogs show remarkable accuracy in identifying pediatric lymphomas during pre-symptomatic stages. Ray set the journal down and walked to the window, looking out at the yard where Lila and the puppy had played earlier. Lymphomas were among the most common childhood cancers, often developing silently until symptoms became severe enough to warrant medical attention. If Martha's notes were accurate, the dog currently sleeping beside his granddaughter could detect the disease months before conventional medical testing. He returned to the journal, searching for more information about Dr. Vasquez. Martha had included not just professional contact, information but personal observations about the researcher's ethical stance and genuine concern for patient welfare. Dr. V, clearly uncomfortable with covert testing protocols, one note read, believes informed consent essential for any human medical research, even non-invasive observation. Ray pulled out his phone and stared at the contact information. It was nearly 10 o'clock, too late for a professional call, but the urgency of his situation made normal etiquette seem irrelevant. He dialed the number, hoping it was still current after 2 years. Dr. Vasquez speaking. The voice was cautious, probably due to the late hour and unfamiliar number. Dr. Vasquez, my name is Ray Thompson. I'm a retired veterinarian in Millbrook, and my late wife Martha attended some of your presentations about Project HeartGuard. There was a long pause before she responded. Mr. Thompson, I remember Martha well. She was one of the most insightful nurses I worked with. I was sorry to hear about her passing. Thank you, Ray said, feeling the familiar pang that mentions of Martha still brought. I'm calling because I believe I've encountered one of your research animals, and I need to understand what that means for my family. Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Thompson, Project HeartGuard was terminated over a year ago. All participating animals were transferred to other programs or humanely euthanized. There shouldn't be any active research animals in civilian settings. Yet I have one sleeping in my house, Ray said quietly. A golden retriever puppy with military-grade microchip identification and behavior patterns that match your research descriptions. It was given to my 8-year-old granddaughter as a prize at a school fair. The silence that followed was profound enough that Ray wondered if the call had been disconnected. Finally, Dr. Vasquez spoke, her voice tight with concern. Mr. Thompson, where exactly did this animal come from? Who arranged for it to be at the school fair? That's what I was hoping you could help me understand, Ray replied. Because if your research was accurate, this dog is exhibiting diagnostic behavior toward my granddaughter, and I need to know what that means. Oh, God, Dr. Vasquez whispered. Can you describe the specific behaviors you've observed? Ray detailed the puppy's focused attention on Lila, its protective positioning, and the unusual alertness that seemed more like assessment than normal pet bonding. As he spoke, he could hear Dr. Vasquez typing rapidly in the background. Mr. Thompson, those behavior patterns indicate a positive detection result, she said finally. If this is indeed one of our trained animals, it's responding to specific chemical markers associated with early-stage cancer development. The words hit Ray like a physical blow, even though he had suspected this conclusion. Hearing it confirmed by the program's lead researcher made it terrifyingly real. What kind of cancer? He asked. Based on the training protocols, most likely lymphoma, Dr. Vasquez replied. The animals were specifically conditioned to detect pediatric lymphomas during pre-symptomatic stages. Mr. Thompson, your granddaughter needs immediate medical evaluation. How certain are these animals? Ray asked, thinking of Lila's peaceful sleep and the devastating impact a cancer diagnosis would have on their family. In controlled trials, accuracy rates exceeded 90%, Dr. Vasquez said. Mr. Thompson, there's something more concerning here. If this animal was placed specifically at your granddaughter's school fair, someone is continuing research without authorization. The program was terminated due to ethical violations, specifically because we were conducting human testing without informed consent. Ray felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October evening. Are you saying someone targeted my granddaughter? I'm saying someone may be monitoring multiple families and children without their knowledge, Dr. Vasquez replied, using decommissioned research animals to conduct unauthorized medical surveillance. This is illegal on multiple levels. What should I do? Ray asked, feeling the weight of protecting both Lila's health and her innocence. First, get your granddaughter evaluated by a trusted oncologist immediately, Dr. Vasquez said. Second, don't let anyone know you've contacted me or that you understand what the animal represents. If someone is conducting unauthorized research, they're likely monitoring the results. How do I arrange medical testing without alarming my daughter or granddaughter? Ray asked. Tell them you want a routine health screening due to family medical history, Dr. Vasquez suggested. Emphasize preventive care rather than diagnostic suspicion. And Mr. Thompson, be very careful who you trust with this information. After ending the call, Ray sat in Martha's chair, surrounded by her medical journals and the accumulated wisdom of her career. The puppy's presence in their family wasn't the innocent coincidence it had appeared to be. Someone had arranged for a trained cancer detection dog to end up with Lila, which meant someone already suspected she might need its diagnostic capabilities. The question was whether that someone was trying to help or simply gathering data for unauthorized research. Either way, Ray now carried knowledge that would change everything about how he approached Lila's care and protection. He looked at Martha's notes one more time, finding comfort in her careful observations and ethical concerns. She would have known exactly how to handle this situation, how to balance medical necessity with family preservation. Now Ray would have to find that wisdom within himself, guided by her example and driven by love for a granddaughter who might be facing the fight of her young life. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, and Ray made plans to become the guardian of secrets he had never wanted to carry. 3 days later, Ray drove the 30 miles to the regional medical center where Dr. Vasquez had agreed to meet him in person. He had told Sarah he was visiting an old colleague about veterinary research, which was technically true, though it barely scratched the surface of why he needed this conversation. The puppy, who Lila had finally named Scout after much deliberation, remained at home with his granddaughter, continuing its subtle but persistent monitoring behavior. Dr. Elena Vasquez was younger than Ray had expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with the careful bearing of someone who had learned to weigh the implications of her words. She met him in a small conference room away from the main hospital traffic, carrying a manila folder that she placed carefully on the table between them. Mr. Thompson, I want you to understand the gravity of what we're discussing, she began without preamble. What I'm about to show you violates several confidentiality agreements. But given the circumstances, I believe patient safety outweighs protocol. She opened the folder, revealing a partially redacted document with Project HeartGuard stamped across the top in red letters. Much of the text was blacked out, but Ray could see enough to understand the scope of what had been attempted. HeartGuard was conceived as a revolutionary approach to early cancer detection, Dr. Vasquez explained, pointing to an organizational chart that showed multiple research facilities across several states. We trained golden retrievers from birth to detect specific chemical signatures associated with oncological development. The accuracy was remarkable, over 93% in controlled trials. Ray studied the document, noting dates and locations. The program was operational for 3 years? Yes, but the last 18 months were increasingly problematic, Dr. Vasquez replied. The Military Oversight Committee began pushing for field testing without informed consent. They wanted to place trained dogs in civilian environments to monitor at-risk populations, like school fairs, Ray said quietly. Dr. Vasquez nodded grimly. The dogs were originally intended for voluntary screening programs, where participants understood they were being evaluated for health markers. But the military saw potential for widespread surveillance. They argued that early detection justified covert monitoring. She turned to another page, showing training protocols. The dogs you described, Scout, would have undergone 18 months of intensive conditioning. They learned to identify not just cancer markers, but specific types and stages. A dog focused on a child the way you've described is detecting very early lymphoma development. Ray felt his stomach tighten. How early? Months before symptoms appear. Sometimes up to 6 months before conventional medical testing could identify the disease, she replied. Which is why the program was so valuable and so dangerous. Dangerous how? Dr. Vasquez leaned back in her chair, choosing her words carefully. Imagine being a parent whose child is being monitored by a dog you don't know, is trained for medical detection. The dog becomes agitated or protective, and you have no idea why. Meanwhile, your child may be developing a life-threatening condition that goes undiagnosed because you don't understand what the animal is trying to tell you. But early detection saves lives, Ray pointed out. Absolutely, she agreed. But only if the detection leads to appropriate medical intervention. Covert monitoring without informed consent means children could die because their families don't understand what they're observing. Ray studied the training protocols, noting the specific behaviors that indicated positive detection. Scout had exhibited every single marker described in the documentation. The protective positioning, the focused attention on Lila's chest area, the unusual alertness that seemed more like assessment than normal animal behavior. Dr. Vasquez, if Scout is detecting what you believe he's detecting, how urgent is Lila's situation? Mr. Thompson, lymphomas in children can progress rapidly once they begin showing symptoms, she replied. Early detection and treatment significantly improve outcomes. If Scout's behavior indicates early-stage development, you may have months to begin treatment before the disease becomes symptomatic. She pulled out another document. This one showing success rates for early intervention in pediatric lymphoma cases. The statistics were encouraging. Children diagnosed in pre-symptomatic stages had survival rates above 95% with appropriate treatment. The question is how Scout ended up with your granddaughter, Dr. Vasquez continued. Official records show all HeartGuard animals were transferred to other military programs or euthanized. Someone operating outside official channels placed that dog specifically with Lila. Could it be coincidence? Ray asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Golden Retriever puppies trained for cancer detection don't end up as school fair prizes by accident, Dr. Vasquez replied. Someone either believes Lila is at risk or someone is using her as a test subject for continued research. The implications made Ray's hands shake slightly. How would they know to target her? Family medical history, previous hospital records, genetic markers. There are multiple ways to identify at-risk children, Dr. Vasquez explained. The original HeartGuard database included thousands of potential subjects based on epidemiological factors. Was Lila in that database? Dr. Vasquez hesitated before responding. Mr. Thompson, I need you to understand that accessing that information could put both of us at risk. But given what you've described about Scout's behavior, I believe your granddaughter was specifically identified as a high-priority subject. Ray felt the walls of the small conference room closing in around him. His granddaughter wasn't just potentially ill, she was being monitored by people who had never asked permission and who might not have her best interests at heart. What do you recommend? He asked. Get Lila evaluated immediately by a pediatric oncologist, Dr. Vasquez said. Use Scout's presence as validation for your concerns, but don't reveal the full extent of what you know. If unauthorized researchers are monitoring the situation, you don't want them to know you've uncovered their involvement. She handed him a business card for Dr. Patricia Hendricks at Children's Hospital. Dr. Hendricks worked with our program during its legitimate phases. She'll understand the significance of Scout's behavior without requiring detailed explanations. And Scout? Keep him with Lila, Dr. Vasquez advised. His continued monitoring could provide valuable information about treatment effectiveness if medical intervention becomes necessary. These dogs don't just detect cancer, they can track its progression or regression. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Vasquez placed her hand on Ray's arm. Mr. Thompson, I want you to know that the legitimate research aspects of HeartGuard were conducted with the highest ethical standards. We genuinely believed we were developing tools to save lives. What's happening with Lila represents an exploitation of that research. Ray drove home through the gathering dusk, the folder of documents locked in his glove compartment, and Scout's true purpose weighing heavily on his mind. By the time he reached Millbrook, he had made several decisions. He would arrange for Lila's medical evaluation within the week. He would begin documenting Scout's behavior patterns for Dr. Hendricks to review, and he would start watching for signs that they were being monitored by whoever had arranged for Scout's placement. At home, he found Lila and Scout in the backyard, her laughter carrying across the evening air as she taught the dog to catch frisbees. Scout's attention remained focused on Lila even during play, his protective positioning never wavering. Now that Ray understood what that behavior meant, watching it felt like observing a medical assessment being conducted by an 8-week-old golden retriever who might be the key to saving his granddaughter's life. The autumn stars began appearing in the darkening sky, and Ray made a silent promise to Martha that he would protect Lila from both the disease Scout was detecting and the people who had put them, all in this impossible situation. A week after his meeting with Dr. Vasquez, Ray received an overnight package with no return address. Inside was a bound manual titled HeartGuard Biosensor K9 Training Protocols, Classification, Level Restricted, and a handwritten note from Dr. Vasquez. This is Scout's specific training documentation. Page 47 contains his individual behavioral markers. Destroy after reading. Trust no one else with this information. Ray waited until Lila was at school and Sarah at work before opening the manual. The technical language was dense, but his veterinary background helped him understand the sophisticated conditioning that had shaped Scout's responses. The dogs weren't simply trained to detect cancer, they were programmed to function as living diagnostic equipment with remarkable precision. Page 47 made his worst fears feel understated. Scout's designation was HeartGuard 7, specialized in pediatric lymphoma detection with specific conditioning for subjects aged 6 to 12. His accuracy rating in controlled trials was 97%. The behavioral markers Ray had observed weren't general signs of cancer detection, they were specific responses to lymphoma development in children. Subject Positioning Protocol. One section read, Agent maintains proximity of 2-3 feet from subject, preferring left-side orientation to optimize respiratory and cardiovascular marker detection. Increased proximity during subject rest periods indicates elevated marker concentration. Ray realized he had been watching Scout demonstrate these exact behaviors for over a week. The dog consistently positioned himself on Lila's left side, moving closer when she was sitting or lying down. During bedtime stories, Scout would settle against Lila's chest in a way Ray had interpreted as affection, but now understood as diagnostic positioning. Alert escalation behaviors, another section detailed. Initial detection phase, increased attention to subject, protective clustering, subtle agitation when separated. Progressive phase, direct physical contact with target detection area. Resistance to subject leaving agent's proximity. Distinctive vocalizations during subject distress. Scout hadn't reached the progressive phase markers yet, which suggested Lila's condition was in early stages. But the initial detection behaviors were unmistakable now that Ray understood their significance. The dog's unwillingness to leave Lila's side, his tendency to position himself between her and potential stresses, and his increased alertness when she coughed or showed any signs of fatigue. All of it matched the training protocols exactly. The manual included detailed technical specifications about the chemical markers the dogs were trained to detect. Lymphoma cells produced specific volatile organic compounds that accumulated in breath, sweat, and other bodily secretions. Scout had been conditioned to recognize these markers at concentrations far below human detection thresholds, responding to changes that preceded clinical symptoms by months. Diagnostic confidence levels, Ray read with growing dread. Sustained behavioral modification over 7 to 10 days indicates 85–90% probability of positive detection. Escalation to progressive phase behaviors indicates 95% probability. Agent false positive rate in controlled trials, less than 3%. Scout had been exhibiting sustained behavioral modifications for 9 days. According to his training specifications, there was less than a 15% chance that his responses were wrong about Lila's condition. Ray closed the manual and sat in his kitchen, looking out at the yard where Scout was waiting patiently for Lila's return from school. The dog's vigil wasn't devotion, it was duty. He had been trained to monitor a specific target for specific markers, and he was reporting a positive detection with the reliability of a sophisticated medical instrument. The weight of this knowledge was becoming unbearable. Every interaction with Lila now carried the shadow of what Scout was detecting. When she climbed into his lap for bedtime stories, Ray found himself cataloging her breathing patterns and skin temperature. When she complained of being tired after school, he wondered if it was normal 8-year-old fatigue or the beginning of symptoms that would soon become obvious. But the manual also contained information that gave Ray hope. The section on treatment response monitoring explained that Scout's behavioral modifications would change as Lila's condition changed. If she received appropriate medical treatment, Scout's alert behaviors would gradually diminish as the chemical markers decreased. The dogs could track treatment effectiveness in real time, providing feedback that conventional medical monitoring couldn't match. Agent serves as continuous diagnostic monitor throughout treatment protocols, the manual explained. Behavioral regression to pre-detection patterns indicates successful therapeutic intervention. Behavioral escalation during treatment indicates therapeutic. Resistance or disease progression, Ray realized that Scout could be not just the detector of Lila's illness, but a partner in monitoring her recovery. The dog's training made him uniquely qualified to track the effectiveness of any treatment she received, providing immediate feedback about therapeutic progress. The afternoon brought Lila home from school, with Scout greeting her at the door with the focused attention Ray now recognized as diagnostic assessment. She settled into her usual spot on the couch for homework, and Scout immediately positioned himself at her left side, his head resting near her chest in what appeared to be affectionate companionship, but was actually sophisticated medical monitoring. "Grandpa, Scout always wants to sit exactly here," Lila observed, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Mrs. Patterson at school said dogs have favorite spots, but Scout seems really particular about where he sits." "Animals often prefer spots where they feel most useful," Ray replied, choosing his words carefully. "Scout probably feels like he's helping you when he sits there." "Helping me do what?" Lila asked, with the curiosity that made protecting her innocence so challenging. "Helping you feel safe and comfortable," Ray said, which was true even if it wasn't the complete truth. Some dogs are naturally protective. That evening, after Lila went to bed with Scout taking his customary position beside her, Ray called Dr. Patricia Hendricks at Children's Hospital. Using Dr. Vasquez's introduction, he arranged an appointment for Lila under the guise of routine preventive screening due to family medical history. "Dr. Thompson, given what Dr. Vasquez has shared about your situation, I want you to know we'll be very thorough," Dr. Hendricks assured him. We'll run comprehensive blood panels and imaging studies that will detect lymphoma in its earliest stages. How do I prepare Lila without frightening her? Ray asked. Tell her it's a special health checkup because she's growing so well, Dr. Hendricks suggested. Children her age respond better to positive framing than clinical explanations. After arranging the appointment for the following week, Ray returned to the manual, reading every detail about Scout's training and capabilities. The dog sleeping upstairs wasn't just a pet who had wandered into their lives. He was a precisely calibrated instrument designed to detect the specific disease that was apparently developing in Lila's young body, but he was also something more. Despite his training and conditioning, Scout had formed a genuine bond with Lila. His protective behaviors went beyond programmed responses to include obvious affection and companionship. Whatever military researchers had intended to create, they had produced an animal capable of both diagnostic precision and authentic love. Ray closed the manual and prepared to destroy it as Dr. Vasquez had instructed. But first, he photographed the pages containing Scout's specific behavioral markers and treatment monitoring protocols. If Lila was about to begin a fight against cancer, he wanted every possible advantage, including a partner who could track her progress with abilities that conventional medicine couldn't replicate. Outside, the October night was crisp and clear, filled with stars that had watched over countless families facing impossible choices. Ray made his decision to trust in early detection, skilled medical care, and the mysterious gift of a dog trained to save the life of a little girl who needed him. Most Ray spent the weekend before Lila's medical appointment reviewing every document he could find related to her health history. In the filing cabinet that had become a repository for post-accident paperwork, he found her school medical records dating back to kindergarten. What he discovered made his understanding of Scout's behavior even more troubling. The records showed a pattern of subtle symptoms that took on new significance in light of what he now knew. Last spring, Lila had complained of fatigue during physical education classes. The school nurse had noted decreased energy during activities, possible seasonal allergies. In late summer, there were 2 instances of Lila feeling under the weather, without specific symptoms, events. The school had attributed to adjustment stress from starting 3rd grade. Ray spread the documents across his kitchen table, creating a timeline that revealed what everyone had missed. The fatigue episodes coincided with periods of rapid growth that could have masked early lymphoma symptoms. The vague complaints of not feeling well occurred during what medical professionals now recognized as the early symptomatic phase of pediatric cancers. Growing pains in legs, worse at bedtime, one report noted from 6 months ago, recommended rest and observation. Ray now knew that bone pain in children could be an early sign of lymphoma affecting the bone marrow. What had seemed like normal childhood complaints were potentially the earliest indicators of the disease Scout had been trained to detect. His review was interrupted by Sarah's arrival from her weekend shift at the hospital. She found him surrounded by paperwork, his expression grim enough to immediately trigger her protective instincts. "Dad, what's wrong?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. "You've been acting strange all week, and now I find you going through Lila's medical records like you're investigating something." Ray looked at his daughter, seeing Martha's steel beneath the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. Sarah had already lost her husband and brother-in-law in the accident, had taken on the responsibility of raising Lila while maintaining her nursing career, and was still processing her mother's death. How could he add the possibility of childhood cancer to her burden? "I've been thinking about preventive care," Ray said carefully. "Lila's lost so much family that I want to make sure we're not missing anything health-related." "Dad, she just had her annual physical 3 months ago," Sarah replied. "Dr. Martinez said she was perfectly healthy, except for being slightly underweight, which we attributed to growth spurts." Ray studied the physical examination report from Dr. Martinez. The findings were indeed normal, but pediatric lymphomas could develop rapidly between examinations. The subtle symptoms documented in school records had appeared after that clean bill of health. "I want to arrange additional screening," Ray said. "Blood work, imaging studies, comprehensive evaluation." Sarah's nursing background immediately made her suspicious. "What kind of screening?" "Dad, what aren't you telling me?" The truth pressed against Ray's chest like a physical weight. Scout was upstairs with Lila, continuing his diagnostic monitoring while she completed homework assignments. The dog's behavior had become more pronounced over the past few days, his protective positioning more insistent and his attention to Lila's respiratory patterns more obvious. "I've been researching pediatric health surveillance," Ray said, which was technically accurate. "Given our family history and the losses Lila has experienced, I think comprehensive screening would be prudent." "Our family history of what?" Sarah asked, her voice sharpening. "Dad, you're talking like you suspect something specific." Ray realized he had painted himself into a corner. He couldn't explain his concerns without revealing Scout's true nature. But his evasiveness was creating exactly the kind of family tension he had hoped to avoid. "Sarah, I just want to be thorough," he said. "After losing your mother and watching how quickly cancer can develop, I'd rather be overly cautious than miss something important." Sarah studied her father's face with the analytical skills that made her an excellent nurse. "This is about Mom's cancer, isn't it? You're worried that Lila might develop the same type of lymphoma." The connection wasn't medically accurate. Martha had developed a different type of lymphoma that wasn't hereditary, but it provided Ray with an explanation that Sarah could accept without revealing the truth about Scout. "The possibility has crossed my mind," Ray admitted. "I know it's probably unnecessary, but losing Martha made me realize how much can change in a short time." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "Dad, I understand the fear. I've had the same thoughts. But we can't live in constant anxiety about what might happen to Lila. She's already lost her parents. She needs stability and normalcy, not medical vigilance based on remote possibilities." "What if they're not remote?" Ray asked, thinking of Scout's behavioral assessments and the 97% accuracy rate documented in his training manual. "Then we'll deal with whatever comes," Sarah replied, with the strength that had carried their family through 2 years of unthinkable losses. "But we can't subject an 8-year-old to medical procedures based on our fears." Ray wanted to tell her about Scout's training, about the chemical markers being detected, about the possibility that early intervention could save Lila's life. But he also knew that revealing the truth would expose them to whoever had arranged Scout's placement, potentially putting Lila at risk from multiple directions. "I've already arranged an appointment with Dr. Hendricks at Children's Hospital," Ray said quietly. Comprehensive screening presented to Lila as routine preventive care. Sarah's expression shifted from concern to frustration. "Dad, you arranged medical care for my daughter without discussing it with me?" "I was planning to discuss it with you after I had the details arranged," Ray replied, realizing his secrecy had created the exact family conflict he had hoped to prevent. "This isn't how we make decisions about Lila's care," Sarah said firmly. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm her guardian. Medical decisions need to be made together." Upstairs, Scout's distinctive bark interrupted their conversation. It wasn't his normal attention-seeking vocalization, but the specific alert sound described in his training manual. Ray's blood chilled as he recognized what Dr. Vasquez had called progressive phase indicators. Both Ray and Sarah hurried upstairs, finding Lila sitting on her bed, looking confused, while Scout positioned himself directly against her chest. His head pressed to her ribs in the exact stance the manual had described for elevated marker concentration detection. "He just started acting weird," Lila said, gently pushing Scout away, only to have him immediately resume the position. "He won't stop trying to listen to my heart." Sarah knelt beside the bed, her nursing instincts activated by Scout's unusual behavior. "Honey, how are you feeling? Any pain or discomfort?" "I'm just tired," Lila replied. "And my chest feels kind of heavy, but Scout pressing against me probably makes it feel that way." Ray exchanged a look with Sarah, seeing his own growing alarm reflected in her expression. Scout's behavior had escalated exactly as his training protocols predicted, responding to changes in Lila's condition that were becoming more pronounced. "Sarah," Ray said quietly, "I think we need to move up that medical appointment." For the first time since their conversation began, Sarah didn't argue with his suggestion. Scout's protective behavior and Lila's complaint of chest heaviness were combining to create exactly the kind of clinical picture that made experienced medical professionals take immediate action. "I'll call Dr. Hendricks." "First thing Monday morning," Sarah agreed, her hand resting protectively on Lila's forehead, while Scout maintained his diagnostic positioning. Ray watched his granddaughter and the dog, who was trying to save her life, realizing that secrets and deception had become secondary to the growing urgency of Lila's medical needs. Whatever was developing in her young body was progressing exactly as Scout's training had prepared him to detect, and time was becoming the most critical factor in everything that would happen next. Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor to Ray's door. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood on his porch at 7 a.m., her professional composure replaced by obvious distress. She carried a manila envelope and looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk immediately," she said, glancing around the neighborhood with the wariness of someone who believed they were being watched. "Is your family home?" "Sarah's at work, Lila's at school," Ray replied, stepping aside to let her enter. "What's happened?" Dr. Vasquez moved quickly to the kitchen window, checking the backyard before sitting down at the table where Ray had spent the weekend reviewing medical records. She opened the envelope and withdrew a typed letter bearing her official letterhead. "This is my formal confession to what really happened with Project Heartguard," she began without preamble. "I'm giving you a copy because you and Lila are in danger, and you need to understand exactly what you're dealing with." Ray sat down across from her, feeling his world shift as she began reading from the document. Project Heartguard was officially terminated 18 months ago due to ethical violations and congressional oversight concerns, she read. However, a subset of military researchers continued the program covertly, using data from the original trials to identify high-risk civilian populations for unauthorized surveillance. "Unauthorized surveillance," Ray repeated, thinking of Scout's placement at the school fair. The dogs that were supposedly euthanized were actually relocated to safe houses and continued training facilities, Dr. Vasquez continued. "A network of researchers, some still active military, some private contractors, have been placing them strategically to monitor children identified as high risk based on genetic markers, family medical history, and environmental factors." Ray felt his hands begin to shake. "You're saying Lila was specifically targeted?" Dr. Vasquez nodded grimly. "Your granddaughter appeared in the original Heartguard database 3 years ago. Her parents' medical records, Martha's oncology nursing background, and genetic markers from her birth screening all flagged her as elevated risk for pediatric lymphoma. 3 years ago," Ray said slowly, "before the accident. The database included over 40,000 children across 12 states, Dr. Vasquez explained. Most were never contacted or monitored. But when Martha died and Lila came to live with you, a retired veterinarian with the expertise to recognize unusual animal behavior, someone decided to conduct an unauthorized field test. The implications hit Ray like a physical blow. They used my wife's death and my granddaughter's tragedy as an opportunity to experiment on her. I'm afraid it's worse than that," Dr. Vasquez said, pulling out another document. "The school fair placement wasn't random. Mrs. Henderson, the teacher who organized the raffle, received a phone call 3 weeks ago from someone identifying themselves as a military family readiness group. They offered to donate a specially trained therapy dog for a deserving student who had experienced family trauma." Ray stared at the documentation, seeing phone records and email communications that proved Scout's placement had been carefully orchestrated. They manipulated a school fair to conduct medical research on an 8-year-old without consent, Without oversight, without any regard for the psychological impact on the family, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. And Mr. Thompson, there are at least 6 other families in similar situations across the region. 6 other children being monitored by dogs they think are pets. 6 other families living with animals trained to detect cancer in their children, while researchers collect data on detection accuracy and disease progression without their knowledge, Dr. Vasquez said. It's human experimentation on a scale that violates every ethical standard in medical research. Ray felt sick thinking about other families experiencing what his had gone through, the growing attachment to animals whose true purpose was medical surveillance. The gradual realization that something was wrong with their children. The manipulation of their trust and love. How did you discover this? Ray asked. I've been investigating unauthorized use of HeartGuard protocols for months, Dr. Vasquez replied. When you contacted me, I realized the program was larger and more widespread than I had suspected. I started tracking down the dogs that were supposedly euthanized and discovered this entire network of covert research. She handed him a list of names and locations. These are the other families currently being monitored. Children aged 6 to 12, all identified as high risk, all given prizes or therapy dogs through supposedly charitable organizations. Ray scanned the list, recognizing 2 families from Millbrook and neighboring communities. People I know, he said quietly. Neighbors whose children are being used as test subjects. The researchers are collecting data on diagnostic accuracy, disease progression timelines, and family psychological responses, Dr. Vasquez explained. They're treating these children like laboratory subjects while their families believe they're caring for beloved pets. What about Scout's behavior toward Lila? Ray asked, dreading the answer. Dr. Vasquez hesitated before responding. Scout's escalating behaviors indicate that Lila's condition is progressing exactly as the researchers predicted. They're documenting the timeline from initial detection to clinical presentation, using her case to validate their unauthorized research. So they've been watching us, waiting to see if Scout's diagnosis proves accurate. Monitoring Scout's behavioral changes, documenting your family's responses, and collecting data that will eventually be used to justify continued covert surveillance, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. They view Lila's situation as a successful field test of their capabilities. Ray stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the yard where Scout waited each day for Lila's return from school. The dog's vigil wasn't just diagnostic monitoring. It was data collection for people who had never asked permission to study his granddaughter. Why are you telling me this? He asked. What changed your mind about protecting the program? Because I helped create these animals, and I never intended for them to be used to exploit families during their most vulnerable moments, Dr. Vasquez replied. The research has value, but not at the cost of informed consent and human dignity. She pulled out a final document from the envelope. This is a complete list of the unauthorized research network, military personnel, private contractors, and civilian researchers who are conducting this surveillance. I'm providing it to congressional investigators and medical ethics boards. What does this mean for Lila's care? Ray asked. Get her evaluated immediately by Dr. Hendricks, but don't reveal what you know about Scout or the surveillance, Dr. Vasquez advised. The researchers can't be allowed to suppress medical treatment to protect their data collection. And Scout, keep him with Lila during her treatment, Dr. Vasquez said. His monitoring capabilities could be valuable for tracking her progress, regardless of how he came to be with your family. The unethical research doesn't diminish his potential to help her recover. What about the other families? I'm contacting each one personally to explain their situation, Dr. Vasquez replied. They deserve to know that their children are being monitored and why. Some of the dogs have already detected early-stage cancers that require immediate treatment. As Dr. Vasquez prepared to leave, she handed Ray her personal phone number. The researchers may try to reclaim Scout once they realize their program has been exposed. Call me immediately if anyone contacts you claiming authority over him. After she left, Ray sat alone in his kitchen, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy that had used his family's tragedy as an opportunity for unauthorized medical research. Lila was being monitored not just by a trained cancer detection dog, but by researchers who viewed her illness as data rather than a little girl's fight for her life. The October morning felt different now, weighted with the knowledge that their family's privacy had been violated by people who claimed to serve the greater good. But Ray also felt a grim satisfaction knowing that the truth was finally emerging, and that other families would be protected from the exploitation his granddaughter had endured. Scout appeared at the window, having somehow sensed Ray's distress from outside. The dog's expression held the same intelligence Ray had noticed from the beginning, but now he understood that Scout was more than a diagnostician. He was a partner who had been placed through deception, but had formed genuine bonds of protection and love. Whatever battles lay ahead, Ray was determined that Lila's medical care would be based on her needs rather than research protocols, and that Scout's remarkable abilities would serve her healing rather than someone else's data collection. Ray called Sarah at the hospital immediately after Dr. Vasquez left, using the urgency in his voice to cut through her resistance to emergency medical appointments. "Sarah, I need you to trust me," he said. "Lila needs to be evaluated today, not next week. I'll explain everything, but Scout's behavior last night combined with her symptoms means we can't wait." "Dad, what exactly are you not telling me?" Sarah asked, but Ray could hear her already making arrangements to leave work early. "I'll explain on the way to Children's Hospital," Ray promised. "Can you pick up Lila from school? Tell them it's a family emergency." 2 hours later, they were driving toward the city with Lila in the back seat, confused by the sudden change in routine, but comforted by Scout's presence beside her. Ray had packed his emergency veterinary kit, medications, monitoring equipment, and emergency supplies that 40 years of practice had taught him to keep ready for any crisis. "Grandpa, why do I need special tests?" Lila asked, her 8-year-old intuition picking up on the adult anxiety filling the car. "Remember how Scout always wants to listen to your heart?" Ray said, choosing his words carefully. "We think he might be telling us something important about your health." "Like what?" Lila pressed, while Scout maintained his protective positioning beside her. "Like maybe you need some medicine to help you feel stronger," Sarah added, her nursing background helping her translate medical concerns into child-appropriate explanations. During the drive, Ray carefully revealed enough of the truth to prepare Sarah for what they might discover, without mentioning the unauthorized surveillance or military conspiracy. He explained that Scout had been trained for medical detection, that his behavior indicated possible health concerns, and that early intervention could be crucial. "You're telling me that the puppy Lila won at the school fair is actually a trained medical detection dog?" Sarah asked, processing information that challenged everything she thought she understood about their situation. "Yes," Ray confirmed. "And his training suggests Lila may have early-stage lymphoma." Sarah was quiet for several miles, her medical knowledge helping her understand the implications. "How certain are these dogs?" "Very certain," Ray replied, thinking of the 97% accuracy rate documented in Scout's training manual. At Children's Hospital, Dr. Patricia Hendricks met them personally, her efficient manner immediately putting Lila at ease while communicating the seriousness of the situation to the adults. She had arranged for comprehensive testing that could be completed in a single afternoon. "Lila, we're going to do some special pictures of the inside of your body and take some blood samples to make sure everything is working properly," Dr. Hendricks explained, crouching down to Lila's eye level. "Can Scout stay with me?" Lila asked, reaching for the dog who had remained close to her side throughout the afternoon. Dr. Hendricks looked at Ray questioningly. "Actually, that might be helpful," she said after Ray's subtle nod. "Some therapy dogs are trained to provide comfort during medical procedures." The testing process stretched through the late afternoon. Blood draws, imaging studies, and detailed physical examinations that gradually revealed what Scout had been detecting for weeks. Dr. Hendricks maintained professional composure throughout, but Ray could see the growing concern in her expressions as results became available. By evening, they had confirmation of what Scout's behavior had been reporting. Lila had early-stage lymphoblastic lymphoma, detectable in blood markers and imaging studies, but not yet advanced enough to cause obvious clinical symptoms. The good news is that we've caught this very early, Dr. Hendricks explained to Ray and Sarah in a conference room while Lila waited with Scout in a nearby family area. Pediatric lymphomas respond extremely well to treatment when diagnosed at this stage. Her prognosis is excellent. How long has she had it? Sarah asked, her voice tight with the controlled emotion that came with receiving confirmation of every parent's worst fear. Based on the blood markers and imaging results, probably 2 to 3 months, Dr. Hendricks replied. Early enough that treatment can begin immediately and be very effective. Ray thought about Scout's initial behavioral changes, realizing the dog had detected Lila's condition almost from the moment he joined their family. The school fair prize had actually been conducting medical surveillance that had probably saved Lila's life. We'll want to begin treatment within the next few days, Dr. Hendricks continued. The protocol is well established and designed specifically for children Lila's age and condition. As they discussed treatment options and schedules, Ray's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Thompson, we need to arrange return of military property currently in your possession. Please respond immediately to coordinate transfer. Ray showed the message to Dr. Hendricks, who frowned deeply. Are they referring to Scout? I believe so, Ray replied, thinking of Dr. Vasquez's warning about research teams trying to reclaim their animals. Mr. Thompson, if Scout's diagnostic abilities helped identify Lila's condition this early, his continued presence during treatment could provide valuable monitoring of her progress, Dr. Hendricks said. I would strongly recommend keeping him with her. Ray's phone rang almost immediately. The caller identified himself as Major Davidson from a military research division and demanded that Scout be returned for national security reasons. Major Davidson, the dog is currently serving as a medical support animal for a child beginning cancer treatment, Ray replied, putting the call on speaker so Dr. Hendricks could hear. Sir, that animal is classified military equipment that was never authorized for civilian deployment, Major Davidson replied. We need immediate return to prevent security breaches. Dr. Hendricks took the phone from Ray. Major Davidson, this is Dr. Patricia Hendricks at Children's Hospital. The animal you're referencing has just helped us diagnose early-stage lymphoma in an 8-year-old patient. Removing him during treatment initiation would be medically contraindicated. Doctor, you don't understand the security implications, Major. You don't understand the medical implications, Dr. Hendricks interrupted. This animal is now part of a patient's treatment team. Any attempt to remove him will be reported to hospital administration and medical ethics boards. After ending the call, Dr. Hendricks turned to Ray with an expression that mixed professional determination with personal outrage. Mr. Thompson, I don't know how Scout came to be with your family, but his diagnostic capabilities are remarkable. I've never seen such early detection of pediatric lymphoma. What do we do about the military demands? Sarah asked. We document everything, Dr. Hendricks replied. Scout's diagnostic accuracy, his ongoing monitoring capabilities, and his therapeutic value for Lila's emotional well-being during treatment. If there are legal challenges, we'll have medical justification for keeping him with her. That evening, they returned home with a diagnosis that was both devastating and hopeful. Lila would begin treatment the following week, with protocols that offered excellent outcomes for children diagnosed at her stage. Scout had positioned himself permanently at her side, his training now aligned with his genuine affection for the little girl he was protecting. Ray unpacked his emergency medical kit, organizing medications and monitoring equipment that might be needed to support Lila's care at home. His veterinary background would help him track her treatment progress and coordinate with Scout's behavioral assessments of her condition. As night fell over Millbrook, Ray realized they were entering a new phase of their family's journey. The unauthorized surveillance that had brought Scout to them was deeply unethical, but the early detection it provided might save Lila's life. The researchers who viewed her as a test subject would face consequences for their actions. But Scout would remain with the family that had learned to love him as more than a diagnostic instrument. Sarah tucked Lila into bed, with Scout maintaining his protective vigil, both of them unaware of the complex forces that had brought them together. In the hallway outside Lila's room, Ray and Sarah stood together as they had through every family crisis, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "Dad," Sarah said quietly, "how do we help her fight this?" "The same way we've survived everything else," Ray replied, thinking of Martha's strength and Michael's determination. "Together with every resource we can find, and with the help of a remarkable dog who somehow knew what we needed before we did." Scout's gentle presence in Lila's room represented both the violation of their privacy and the gift of early detection that might save her life. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of treatment, continued battles with military researchers trying to reclaim their property, and the challenging process of helping an 8-year-old understand why she needed medicine to fight something she couldn't see or feel. But tonight, Ray felt something he hadn't experienced since Martha's death, confidence that their family would not only survive, but emerge stronger from the trials ahead. Scout's diagnostic abilities, combined with excellent medical care and the fierce love of a grandfather and aunt, created advantages that Lila's illness couldn't overcome. The October wind rattled the windows one more time, carrying the promise of winter, but also the assurance that spring would return as it always did, bringing renewal and hope to those who had endured the darkest seasons. Lila's treatment began on a crisp November morning that felt like the world was holding its breath. The pediatric oncology wing at Children's Hospital had been decorated with colorful murals and comfortable furniture, designed to make the space feel less clinical. But Ray could see the careful medical precision underlying every detail. Dr. Hendricks had developed a comprehensive treatment protocol specifically tailored to Lila's condition and age. The laminated document she handed to Ray contained medication schedules, monitoring requirements, and progress milestones that would guide them through the next 6 months of treatment. Scout's behavioral assessments had been incorporated into the monitoring plan, creating what Dr. Hendricks called the most innovative diagnostic partnership I've ever supervised. "Grandpa, why does Scout get to come to the hospital with me?" Lila asked as they settled into the treatment room. She was remarkably calm for an 8-year-old beginning cancer treatment, her trust in the adults around her creating a stability that impressed the medical staff. "Because he's part of your care team," Ray explained, watching Scout position himself beside Lila's treatment chair with the precision that marked all his trained responses. "Some doctors use special equipment to monitor how patients are doing. We have Scout." The first treatment session went remarkably smoothly. Lila tolerated the medications well, and Scout's behavior remained calm and attentive rather than agitated, which Dr. Hendricks interpreted as a positive indicator of treatment effectiveness. The dog seemed to understand that the medical procedures were helping rather than harming Lila, adapting his protective instincts to support rather than interfere with her care. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Hendricks observed privately to Ray. Scout's real-time assessment of Lila's response to treatment provides feedback that our conventional monitoring can't match. He's detecting changes at the cellular level that won't show up in blood work for days. Ray felt a complex mixture of gratitude and anger. Scout's abilities were proving invaluable for Lila's care, but they had been placed in this situation through manipulation and unauthorized research. The dog's remarkable skills couldn't justify the violation of their family's trust and privacy. That afternoon, while Lila rested at home with Sarah monitoring her post-treatment recovery, Ray received an unexpected visit from Major Davidson and Dr. Marcus Webb, the lead researcher who had continued Project HeartGuard after its official termination. Mr. Thompson, we need to discuss the return of military property, Major Davidson began without preamble, standing in Ray's driveway with the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. What you need to discuss is why you conducted unauthorized medical research on my granddaughter, Ray replied. His 40 years of veterinary practice, having taught him to stand firm against intimidation, tactics, Dr. Webb stepped forward with the practiced calm of someone who had justified questionable research decisions before. Mr. Thompson, the early detection of your granddaughter's condition demonstrates the life-saving potential of our program. Without Scout's diagnostic capabilities, Lila's lymphoma might not have been discovered until treatment options were far more limited. Without your unauthorized surveillance, my granddaughter wouldn't have been targeted for experimentation in the first place, Ray countered. You manipulated a school fair to place a trained animal with a child you identified as high risk without asking permission from her family. The greater good sometimes requires difficult decisions, Dr. Webb replied. Scout's diagnostic accuracy has been validated through Lila's case, providing data that could save thousands of children's lives. Ray stepped closer to both men, his grandfather's protective instincts overriding any intimidation he might have felt. My granddaughter is not your test subject. She's a little girl fighting cancer who happens to benefit from Scout's abilities. But that doesn't excuse the violation of her rights or her family's privacy. Mr. Thompson, Scout represents significant government investment and classified training, Major Davidson said. We have legal authority to reclaim him regardless of personal attachments that may have developed. Then you'll need to explain to Children's Hospital why you're removing a critical component of a cancer patient's treatment team, Ray replied. Dr. Hendricks has documented Scout's medical necessity for Lila's ongoing care. Dr. Webb consulted a tablet containing what appeared to be detailed records of Scout's behavioral assessments over the past weeks. Her monitoring indicates that Lila's treatment is progressing well. Scout's diagnostic alerts are diminishing, suggesting successful therapeutic intervention. You're monitoring? Ray repeated, realizing the full scope of their surveillance. You've been watching and recording Scout's behavior throughout Lila's diagnosis and treatment, collecting data on diagnostic accuracy and treatment response patterns, Dr. Webb confirmed. Lila's case provides valuable validation of our methodologies. Ray felt his anger crystallize into determined action. Dr. Webb, Major Davidson, you have exactly 1 minute to leave my property before I call both the police and every media contact I can reach. Your research ends now, and Scout remains with Lila for as long as she needs him. Mr. Thompson, you're interfering with classified military research. I'm protecting my granddaughter from people who view her illness as a data collection opportunity, Ray interrupted. Your classified research doesn't supersede medical ethics or family rights. The confrontation was interrupted by Scout, appearing at Ray's side. The dog's alert posture suggesting he had sensed Lila's distress from inside the house. His loyalty was clearly with the family that had loved him rather than the researchers who had trained him. Gentlemen, I believe Scout has made his choice about where he belongs, Ray said, noting the dog's protective positioning. You can attempt legal action to reclaim him, but you'll face medical professionals, ethics boards, and media attention that will expose every aspect of your unauthorized research. As the men returned to their vehicle, Ray realized the battle for Scout's custody was just beginning, but watching the dog maintain his vigil over Lila's recovery, he also understood that love and medical necessity created stronger claims than military classification systems. The treatment plan Dr. Hendricks had developed represented hope grounded in both advanced medical science and Scout's remarkable diagnostic abilities. Whatever legal challenges lay ahead, Ray was determined that Lila's healing would proceed without interference from researchers who had already exploited their family enough. Inside the house, Sarah was helping Lila with homework while Scout monitored her energy levels and treatment response with the dedication that transcended his original training to become genuine partnership in her. Recovery. 3 weeks later, Ray found himself in a congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C., surrounded by cameras, attorneys and legislators investigating the unauthorized continuation of Project Heartguard. Dr. Vasquez's whistleblowing had triggered a federal investigation that revealed the scope of illegal human experimentation being conducted across multiple states. The formal testimony document he carried contained his careful account of how Scout had been placed with Lila, the diagnostic capabilities that had saved her life, and the ethical violations that had put their family at risk. Ray had spent days preparing his statement with congressional investigators who were building a case against the researchers who had exploited vulnerable families. "Mr. Thompson," Congressman Martinez began, "please describe for the committee how your granddaughter came to be involved in unauthorized medical research." Ray looked out at the hearing room, seeing families from the other monitored children seated in the gallery. Their shared experience of manipulation and violation had created bonds that transcended the individual cases, transforming them into advocates for protecting future families from similar exploitation. Congressman Martinez, "My 8-year-old granddaughter won what she believed was a puppy at her school fair," Ray began, his voice carrying the weight of both gratitude and anger. What she actually received was a highly trained military animal designed to detect cancer in children, placed specifically with her because researchers had identified her as high risk without her family's knowledge or consent. And this animal, Scout, did indeed detect cancer in your granddaughter? "Yes, sir." Scout's behavior indicated early-stage lymphoma, approximately 2 months before conventional medical testing could have identified the disease, Ray confirmed. His diagnostic accuracy potentially saved Lila's life by enabling treatment during the most favorable therapeutic window. "Mr. Thompson, how do you reconcile the life-saving benefits with the ethical violations involved?" Ray had anticipated this question, understanding the complex moral territory that Scout's case represented. "Congressman, early cancer detection is invaluable, and Scout's abilities are remarkable. But medical research conducted without informed consent, especially involving children, violates fundamental principles of human dignity and patient rights. Can you explain the emotional impact on your family?" "We formed deep emotional bonds with an animal we believed was a pet, while unknowingly living under surveillance by researchers who viewed my granddaughter's illness as a validation of their methodologies," Ray replied. "The violation of trust affected not just our family's privacy but our ability to process Lila's diagnosis without the additional trauma of learning we had been manipulated." Congressman Williams leaned forward with questions about the broader scope of the unauthorized research. "Mr. Thompson, are you aware of other families affected by this program?" "Yes, sir. Dr. Vasquez has documented at least 6 other families in our region whose children were monitored without their knowledge," Ray said. "Some of those children have also been diagnosed with early-stage cancers that their families initially attributed to their pets' unusual behavior. What would you recommend to ensure this type of unauthorized research doesn't continue?" Ray consulted his prepared statement, thinking of the conversations he had shared with other affected families. Strict oversight of military research programs, criminal prosecution for researchers who conduct human experimentation without consent, and protection for whistleblowers who expose unethical practices. And regarding Scout's continued role in your granddaughter's care, Scout has become an integral part of Lila's treatment team, Ray explained. Dr. Hendricks at Children's Hospital has documented his value in monitoring treatment effectiveness and providing emotional support during recovery. His diagnostic abilities, regardless of how he came to us, serve Lila's medical needs. The testimony continued through the afternoon, with Ray answering detailed questions about Scout's training documentation, the timeline of Lila's diagnosis, and the researchers' attempts to reclaim their military property. Each answer built the case for criminal prosecution of those who had conducted unauthorized research while protecting the animals whose diagnostic abilities had genuine medical value. During a break, Dr. Vasquez approached Ray in the hallway outside the hearing room. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to know that your testimony has been instrumental in exposing the full scope of this program," she said. "The committee is recommending criminal charges against Dr. Webb and Major Davidson. What about the other families?" Ray asked. "Each family will retain custody of their animals, with legal documentation establishing the dogs as medical support animals," Dr. Vasquez replied. "The legitimate benefits of early detection don't justify the covert research, but these animals shouldn't be punished for their handlers' ethical failures. And future research? Strict informed consent protocols, independent ethics oversight, and transparency requirements that prevent this type of exploitation," Dr. Vasquez said. "Scouts' diagnostic accuracy will help establish proper programs where families voluntarily participate in early detection. Research, the final session of testimony, focused on recommendations for preventing future ethical violations while preserving the legitimate medical benefits of animal-assisted diagnosis." Ray's statement emphasized the need for transparency, consent, and respect for human dignity in all medical research, especially involving children. As he prepared to return home to Millbrook, Ray reflected on the journey that had transformed his family from unknowing research subjects into advocates for ethical medical practices. Scout's placement had begun as an exploitation, but had evolved into a partnership that saved Lila's life while exposing systematic violations of research ethics. The congressional hearing had provided a platform for demanding accountability while protecting the animals, whose remarkable abilities served genuine medical needs. For Ray, the resolution represented both justice for the violations his family had endured, and hope that future families would be protected from similar exploitation, while still benefiting from advances in early disease detection. 6 months later, Ray stood in Dr. Hendrick's office, holding a document that represented everything their family had fought to achieve. Lila's clean bill of health contained the words every grandfather wanted to hear: "No evidence of disease. Treatment complete. Excellent prognosis for long-term survival." Scout sat beside him, no longer displaying the focused diagnostic behaviors that had characterized his early months with Lila. The dog's alert positioning had gradually relaxed as Lila's treatment progressed, his training protocols satisfied by the elimination of the chemical markers he had been conditioned to detect. Now his attention to Lila reflected genuine affection rather than medical assessment. "Mr. Thompson, Lila's recovery has been remarkable," Dr. Hendrick said, reviewing the final test results. "The early detection provided by Scout's diagnostic capabilities allowed us to begin treatment during the optimal therapeutic window. Her prognosis is excellent, and Scout's role going forward?" Ray asked, scratching behind the dog's ears in a gesture that had become natural after months of partnership. "He's transitioned from diagnostic instrument to therapy partner," Dr. Hendricks replied. "His presence provided stability throughout Lila's treatment, and his behavioral monitoring helped us track treatment effectiveness in real time. The integration of his abilities with conventional medical care created an unprecedented approach to pediatric cancer treatment." Through the office window, Ray could see Lila playing in the hospital's family garden with Sarah, her energy levels fully restored and her laughter carrying the particular quality of someone who had fought a serious battle and emerged victorious. The 9-year-old who had begun treatment 6 months ago was stronger in ways that transcended physical healing. "Dr. Hendricks, have other families benefited from similar partnerships?" Ray asked, thinking of the congressional testimony that had led to reformed research protocols. "The legitimate HeartGuard program has been re-established, with proper oversight and informed consent procedures," she replied. "Families now voluntarily participate in early detection research, understanding exactly what the animals are trained to monitor and how the information will be used. The drive home to Millbrook took them through the autumn landscape that had become familiar territory over months of treatment trips. Lila chatted excitedly about returning to regular school attendance, her plans for Scout's continued training as a therapy dog, and her excitement about helping other children who were beginning their own cancer treatments. "Grandpa, can Scout and I visit kids who are just starting treatment?" she asked from the back seat, her hand resting on Scout's head. "Dr. Hendricks said some of them are scared, and Scout is really good at making people feel better." "I think that's an excellent idea," Ray replied, thinking of how Lila's experience had transformed her from patient to advocate. "Scout has proven himself very good at helping people understand what they need." At home, Ray found Martha's study exactly as he had left it months ago, her medical journals still containing the notes that had helped him understand Scout's true nature. But now the room felt different, not like a shrine to loss, but like a foundation for continued service. Martha's passion for ethical medical care had guided Ray through the complex decisions that followed Scout's arrival. He opened the journal to the page containing Martha's notes about Project Heartguard, adding his own observations about the program's potential when conducted with proper oversight and informed consent. Future researchers would benefit from understanding both the remarkable capabilities of trained detection animals and the ethical requirements for working with human subjects. Sarah joined him in the study, carrying a folder of correspondence from other families affected by the unauthorized research. "Dad, we've been invited to participate in a documentary about ethical medical research," she said. "The producers want to highlight how early detection can save lives when conducted properly. What do you think about public attention?" Ray asked, knowing that their family's preference had always been for privacy. "I think Lila's story could help other families understand their options for early detection, while demanding proper consent procedures," Sarah replied. "She's already become an advocate for ethical research. This would give her a larger platform." That evening, as autumn settled over their backyard, Ray watched Lila and Scout playing fetch with the easy companionship that had replaced the intense diagnostic focus of Scout's early months with their family. The dog's training remained intact, but his purpose had evolved from surveillance to partnership. The mailbox contained letters from families across the country whose children had benefited from properly conducted early detection programs. Dr. Vasquez's work to establish ethical research protocols had created opportunities for voluntary participation in potentially life-saving screening. With full understanding of what was being monitored and why, "Grandpa," Lila said, as they settled into their evening routine, "I'm glad Scout came to us, even though the people who sent him weren't very nice." "Why is that, sweetheart?" Ray asked, noting how Scout positioned himself nearby without the intense proximity that had characterized his diagnostic period. "Because he helped you and the doctors find my sickness before it got really bad." Lila replied with the directness that continued to amaze the adults around her. "And now we can help other kids and their families have the same kind of help." Ray tucked Lila into bed with Scout, taking his familiar place beside her, though now his presence reflected companionship rather than medical monitoring. The journey that had begun with a mysterious school fair prize had led them through diagnosis, treatment, legal battles, and congressional testimony, ultimately transforming their family into advocates for ethical medical research and early disease detection. Martha's memory lived on in the principled approach Ray had taken to protecting both Lila's health and other families' rights. The foundation she had established in Martha's name now supported research into ethical applications of animal-assisted medical diagnosis, ensuring that Scout's remarkable abilities served medicine without exploiting patients. Outside, the October wind carried the promise of winter, but also the assurance of spring's return. Lila's recovery represented more than successful cancer treatment. It demonstrated how love, ethical medical care, and the remarkable abilities of a trained animal could combine to save lives while preserving human dignity. The clean bill of health on Ray's desk represented Not just the end of Lila's treatment, but the beginning of a new chapter for their family as advocates, partners, and guardians of the trust that medical research required. Scout's diagnostic capabilities had saved one little girl's life and exposed systematic violations that protected countless other families from similar exploitation. In the quiet house, 3 generations of Thompson family members slept peacefully, watched over by a golden retriever whose remarkable training had been redeemed through love. Early detection had led to successful treatment, and ethical violations had been transformed into protection for future families facing similar challenges.